All right, good morning, everybody, or good evening, or good afternoon, or whatever the hell you're doing, when you tune into this podcast. And this is always a fun one to tune into because I have my friend Dwain McFarland from Fantasy Life joining us just early in training camp. So we're going to get a chance to talk about, we're just going to wing it. I think that's what we're going to do here. So, Dwain, always nice to see you. How's it going?
Oh man, I'm doing great. I really appreciate you having me on. I know we've kind of talked about this for about a month. We were going to do it a few weeks back. We're like, well, let's let training camp get here, let things get cooking a little bit. But yeah, man, I'm always excited to come hang with you. You know that, one of my favorite people on the planet, and it's just it's different. Like when I get to come on this show, I never know where you're going.
Yeah.
And I just, so I enjoy that. It's kind of like we just go all over the place, and we just talk football. So. Yeah. What better way to start a Saturday?
Right. And just to give you a little behind the scenes, like normally people give you like a list of stuff, and I was like about 20 minutes before the show was about to start, I'll send you a link on X. And then I didn't tell him I was going to write up questions. I wrote up about 7 or 8 questions, and then I said, we could just wing it too, and we're just going to treat it kind of more like one of our phone calls, saying some of the topics we talk about that don't need to be on air, but just be boring probably for everybody. But we are going to start with one of them, and I think because there was one that Dwain liked, is who doesn't really fit the profile, whatever the profile is for you from any angle that you believe is important to say this guy could have a career year, but you still are excited about them, and tell us why.
Yeah, so this was a mind bend thinking of this question this way, because the way I create my ranks and my tiers is it's really based on all the things, right? You've got talent, then you've got really the situation that they're in. So if you're a wide receiver, like your quarterback play is going to matter. The other teammates you've got to compete with for targets, that's going to matter. The scheme that you get to play in, that's also going to matter. So depending on the position, like I'm trying to look across all of those things. So I always think of them, some prospects kind of get the perfect grade, right? They check all the boxes. And you guys know who they are, and generally the market has those right. They go in rounds 1 and 2 of fantasy drafts, right? Then there's you get down to these combinations. Oh, has the talent, not in the best situation though. And then you have the others where you're like, man, I don't really like this guy, but it's hard to argue with his situation and the opportunity. And I'll start with that, going from that angle. And I think anytime you're going to think from that angle, you really need to go with running back, right? Because I believe with wide receiver, there is still a skill set that you have to have a prerequisite level that even if you get on the field and your coach says, we're going to play you 100% of the snaps tomorrow, if you're not good, the quarterback's not targeting you because you're not going to be able to get open. There's all these other steps you have to take that are prerequisites to getting the football, being on the same page with the quarterback, all those things. They've got to trust you. But running back, not saying skill doesn't matter here, but if you're the starter and you're going to get the ball, they turn and hand the ball to you. And then 10 other players, mainly 9 other players, they've got a job to do to try to help you do your job. So there's still, you still need a good offensive line in those things, but the ball's in your hands. You don't have to earn the target. So the player for me that when I look at that, thinking of it from that angle is Joe Mixon. Because Joe Mixon's skill set has clearly deteriorated over the last couple of seasons. I think you see it on the film. You can speak to that level, but you also see it in the data points. I know yards after contact aren't a perfect stat, and you've talked a lot about the variations of what yards after contact should be, and I totally agree with that. But at the high level, it is still one of the stickiest metrics year over year to running backs. So we know they have some level of really owning that stat. Ian Hardis does a cool stat with it where he says the number of times they had at least 2 yards after contact, their percentage of their runs, which is more probably akin to my guess of how you would probably try to look at a stat like that, Matt. But and you look at the missed tackles force, all those things, they're all down for Joe Mixon. He's at the age where we know the cliff could be there. But then I look at the offense, I'm like, okay, we've got Bobby Slowick from the Kyle Shanahan tree. We've got a loaded offense with all these weapons that should move the ball up and down the field with Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz. I mean, this is a who's list of fantasy stars. This, if CJ Stroud doesn't regress in year 2, which is, even if he regresses some because he had a really good rookie season, this offense should score a ton of touchdowns. And we know that in this play style of offense, even though they may air out more than a 49ers offense, they could also run it plenty inside the 5. Look at Mike McDaniel and what they did last year with Raheem Mostert. Look what they did with Achane. Now, obviously, Mixon doesn't grade out as well as those players like in the efficiency buckets, but like he's still a bigger body back that can punch it in once you get down inside the 5. So I could see Joe Mixon being like that Curtis Martin late career Jet season. And Mixon's not as old as Martin was, by the way, when that occurred for him. But I could see that kind of season for Joe Mixon. So there's part of his profile that says, man, this is not the type of back I'm normally interested in. But when I look at this offense, and the one other thing I'll say here is efficiency doesn't always lead to more opportunities, and less efficiency doesn't lead to less opportunities. Coaches, there is something going on that we don't have in our spreadsheets that determines running back pecking orders, how often they're willing to put these players on the field. Now, every coach is different. Some may lean more to guys that are efficient, but there's definitely across the league a thing I've noticed in studying this data. It's like there's just guys they trust on all the downs. And Mixon is one of the players that over the last 4 to 5 years, his coaching staffs have trusted him in all situations. And I look at this depth chart, and while like I still have some hope for Dameon Pierce, I don't think you can call him a threat, right? Jawar Jordan, like I think there's some things to like, but I wouldn't call him a threat to Mixon. So that would be one for me. A late career, what is Mixon this year? Mixon's going to be 28, or is he going to be 29? He's right. He's going to be 28 when the season starts. 28.1 when the season starts. So yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be as late as Curtis Martin, but you don't expect running backs to have their career year at age 28.
So I just got to ask you, when you're like, out at a social event with your friends hanging out and you say, it's Landry's birthday, do you say like he's like 20.3?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't say Landry will be 28.3 at the 3/4 mark of the NFL season. No, I don't say stupid stuff like that. I don't know why I said a stupid thing like that just now, but I did.
I just thought
I was looking
fun.
at a spreadsheet.
Yeah, that works. That works. I like the Joe Mixon call, and it's fun to talk about some of the data point, because when you talk about yards after contact, I think for me what it's about is I'd like to differentiate elusiveness from power or contact balance. Because like Saquon Barkley, I've often written about the difference between, say, Saquon Barkley and Nick Chubb, and how Barkley'd get the slap on the thigh pad and go for 75, but Chubb would have to basically remove a defensive tackle from his chest, at the hole and get 5. Which one's more valuable display of power? Because I'm approaching from a scout's perspective of how I want to parse it out. So I agree with, it totally makes sense that still has value the way it's measured in the mass media. It's just that one's maybe more of an expression of elusiveness, and one is, and it's the outcome.
My guess
avoiding
is that,
angles.
like, if you had someone to chart all that stuff full time for you all the time, like I think you're probably onto something with a lot of those things. We might find that they're actually more sticky year over year when we think about them from that lens rather than the overall lens. Probably some of the noise we get in those data points comes to some of the issues you're talking about.
And we're working on that in the background here. We got a hamster going in the background on the wheel, kind of trying to work through some of that.
I've got like 3 hamsters over here, so you're gonna have to up your game.
I'm gonna, but I do have something worthwhile chasing the hamster. So
yeah, you do.
So
you should just forget it. Your hamster's gonna die.
I don't know. He hung out with a baby deer this week or a couple weeks ago that came up to him and said "Mama" and nuzzled up against him. And considering he had a standoff with one like 3 weeks ago that was a mature deer, I was pleasantly surprised that he had a Disney princess moment. So you just never know. But yeah, I mean, I like the Mixon one. It makes sense. He's reliable in terms of the playbook. He may no longer have the explosion that he once had. And so I think that may lead into some of it. I think for me, I'm going to take my chances and pick a wide receiver here. Because one of the things that I've been looking at recently, Dwain, over at Football Guys, is what are good hands, and taking some of the RSP data that I have collected from measuring prospects and seeing if there's a correlation between the techniques that they use to catch the football and fantasy tiers. And so I took like 6 years of data. I looked at about the top 75 over the past 6 years. The top 75 for each year over the past 6 years, and just looked at at tiers. And what I discovered was like that elite players in the top 3 in a 12-team league, 94% of the time they attack the ball. The way you would grade them, their attack of the football and the RSP was consistently strong. Like they used the correct position with their hands. Their hands were tight. They approached it according to the type of trajectory of the target. And only one player out of the 6 years actually showed any lapses with that on his record, and that was CeeDee Lamb. No one had serial flaws like, Quentin Johnston last year, who the clap attack, the Ricky Bobby, I don't know which way to use my hands kind of thing on the target. So, looking at that, and then you can see with the tiers, like the top wide receiver 1, that good hands value dropped from 94 to 82%, and then to wide receiver 2s it dropped to 58%, and wide receiver 3 it held at 58%, but the number of serial lapses doubled. So it went from the Quentin Johnston like behavior at wide receiver 2s had it 8% of the time. Wide receiver 1s didn't have any of that, nor did elite players. But wide receiver 3s had 17% of the time. So what you're seeing is that the hands get less reliable in terms of the very, fundamental thing that you want to see with attacking the football. And then this week I looked at tracking, after contact, and tight coverage. And I found that after contact and tight coverage weren't as meaningful as just the pure, are your hands in the best position to catch the football? And then tracking was interesting because tracking is one of those things where you look at and you realize that if they don't have this, they're they're fucking in trouble. That's just
they don't get it later in their career.
It's hard to do. One of the lone exceptions who had serial flaws doing it was Devontae Adams. And he was a little slow to start his career, too, for a number of reasons, mainly route running, which we'll look at down the line. But the player who kind of, I look at and go, he's got flaws with tracking the football. He's had flaws with using his hands right. But I like what he does overall, and he has big moments, is Garrett Wilson. When you watch Garrett Wilson play, I feel like there's a part of me that's I wanted to put him as a top 5 receiver. If Aaron Rodgers can stay upright and stay out of his own way, which I think he's managed to do on the football field for the most part for his career, regardless of what people think of him off the field. And if the offensive line can hold up, which is a big if with a lot of these guys on paper. But looking at Wilson, he hasn't had a quarterback of Aaron Rodgers' skill. He also hasn't had a quarterback of Aaron Rodgers' skill who would expect him to make the plays on a level of volume that he's going to be expected to make, I think, in terms of contact, tight coverage, different odd angles, things that are going to maybe test how you place your hands on the football with tight coverage around you. And if I look at his profile, I would say he hasn't been tested enough for me to feel like he's completely past his pre-draft evaluation, even though there's so many things he's done well, and I had a high rating for him. But
it's hard to grade him when you watch him because Zach Wilson was so terrible.
Exactly.
I've watched every target from Garrett Wilson probably multiple times at this point over the last 2 years.
Yeah,
and it's a hard watch from a quarterback standpoint.
Exactly. So you look at it and go, now that he's going to have a guy that's going to at least put him to the standard of what a top wide receiver should look like, can he meet that? That's the big question. And at first, I had him, I think, number 4, number 5 on my board. And then after doing this work, and looking at his track record, I thought maybe that's a little too aggressive for a player that I'm looking at. That I can get probably as a low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2 in terms of value, and maybe I should just keep it that way and not be as bullish on him. And
let me ask you something. Did by chance Deontay Johnson have similar issues?
Deontay Johnson.
To what you're talking about with Garrett Wilson.
He did. And so
because that's my low end comp for Garrett Wilson.
Yes.
If things don't go right, maybe which isn't bad. No. Deontay Johnson still has had a wide receiver 1 finish on his resume. But what's funny is the comp I gave for his high end is he's this year's CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah.
He's the guy everybody's taking at the end of round 1 that finishes as the wide receiver 1 overall. The
Yeah.
low end comp is Deontay Johnson, this guy that's earned all these targets all through his career, but for one reason or another, and it could be mostly quarterback related, but if it's not, then like he's a guy that can earn targets, but does it ever truly translate into major fantasy points? And there's some sort of disconnect there.
He did. He had trouble with where he used his hands. He even had trouble with tracking the ball. One of the things that was much publicized about him is how much he worked with tennis balls, catching tennis balls as a drill, and he does it all the time, and that it improved. But the thing is, with players who, what I'm looking at, just overview from the data that I'm accumulating, is I'm starting to develop a theory that, and I think it's just kind of more of a common sense thing, is that players who have had like serial flaws or lapses, and I've noted guys that I track that way in the RSP who I've seen improve enough that they're no longer, maybe they have lapses instead of serial flaws, or maybe they don't have lapses anymore. Like CeeDee Lamb's one of those guys. He doesn't have that many lapses. He doesn't have enough for me to qualify as a lapse. But they can easily regress more often than a guy who's done it perfectly for a long time, or done it well enough that they don't qualify in that regard. So I wonder if a guy like Johnson, I feel like I've seen enough with him where he had a good year, that he had some lapses. And so I wonder, that's kind of where I wonder with Wilson. Is there a guy that maybe is the opposite for you, where like everything doesn't look all that great? Everything looks great, but you're like, not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's not one where everything looks great, because if they do, they're at the top of my board.
Sure.
But if we want to kind of go down, the talent profile, where I think there's a player that I think is really talented, but I worry the situation is going to hold him down this year. I think it's Josh Downs for the Colts. Like I really like Josh Downs, especially early last year. So before his knee injury in week 9, he had a 21% target share. He was averaging 12.5 fantasy points per game in a PPR. And this is a guy that wasn't even getting on the field for 85 or 90% of the plays, right? Yeah. Because he was playing from the slot. And so when I look at this offense for the Colts, overall, I like it. I think they've got a smart coaching staff. And I think that Josh Downs is probably the second best, maybe even the best wide receiver on this team. I think Michael Pittman is a really good possession guy. He's going to earn a lot of targets. But when you start talking about blending an ability to get open, earn targets, and potentially create big plays at a consistent level, which I don't think A.D. Mitchell's at the consistent level yet. I think there's definitely upside in his game down the road. But Josh Downs, when I look at him and the potential mismatches inside, like I get excited because he showed for what he did as a rookie, it was really strong. But then I'm like, this is going to be an offense that's going to run a lot of multiple tight ends. Can Josh Downs win the outside role? Or is that going to be A.D. Mitchell or Alec Pierce? The way their coaches talk, it's probably going to be Mitchell and Pierce, which means, okay, there's going to be game scripts where he completely gets eliminated and he's only getting to play 40 or 50% of the time. Maybe they can keep him to 60% by rotating him to the outside some. And then we still have the questions with Anthony Richardson. Like he definitely had some bright spots like in his film coming out. He kind of had the same thing last year, but he also had some major issues at times. So we don't know for sure about the accuracy. And we've got an offense that's probably going to run the ball a lot anyway. And you're going to have many pass plays turn into scrambles. So you're going to actually have plays that are designed to be a pass that are going to then turn into a run play because Anthony Richardson is going to be like, hold my beer. I can get 30, right here just by taking off, and I don't have to risk throwing a pick. So Josh Downs, it's like I want to take him more in fantasy drafts. And he's not priced up, so you can get him late. So, I mean, that makes this take kind of weak, I guess, because it's like the market's really not that high on Josh Downs anyway. But I want to be. I really want to be because I really do like the player. The challenge is just the environment, really brings him down. But if Josh Downs was playing slot wide receiver, in a Rams offense where I knew they were going to run 11 personnel all the time, a pure pocket drop back passer, like a Stafford, like a Kirk Cousins, a Tua even, those Jared Goff, those guys that are more point guards, I would love Josh Downs. He just happens to sit in this offense where a lot of things go against him.
I think he's going to tease you because I think one of the highlights about Anthony Richardson that people talked about, and I know my buddy Will Hewlett talked about, who coaches Anthony, said that there's tape where Richardson showed advanced pre-snap reading and made a huge play with downs on one up the seam that I think we all remember, if we've remember seeing it, that was totally on Richardson, and that was totally a pre-snap recognition of something that the play wasn't, and converted the play into a big passing play that wasn't designed to be. So I can see there's going to be moments where I think he'll find downs for huge plays, and you go, oh, well, maybe there's something there. And then the offense itself, and then Richardson with growing pains will probably also contribute to that too. So yeah, I think that's a good one. It just makes me think, of a player right now that I want to get your thoughts on is Devon Achane. Are you in? Or are you looking at this and going, okay, are we going to find opposing defenses that say, okay, we've got to stop this like vertical element that's stretching the field horizontally the way it is? Or are we looking at it and saying he gets enough touches between the tackles that whole gadgetry thing that the McDaniel offense uses him in isn't going to matter that much?
Yeah, I'm in on Achane. It's just the problem is I'm a sucker for ceilings, and we've seen the ceiling, with Achane. And here's the other challenge: a defense can decide to do whatever they want. The problem is you can't take away everything Miami does.
Right.
There's just too many playmakers, so you have to literally every week pick your poison. Like what are we going to try to do? I think of like Bill Belichick. He would always talk about that. What's the best thing this offense does? Let's take that away. Okay, great. Now you have another great thing you got to worry about with Miami. Are you going to take that away? Well, then there's another great thing that you've got to worry about. Like Mike McDaniel has done a great job with Tua, who I think is I like him, but he's a middle of the road quarterback. Yeah. And this is the best passing offense in the NFL over the last 2 seasons from a yardage perspective. So yeah, I love Achane, and the way I kind of look at him is this. Let's say he regresses, which he's probably going to. The guy averaged 7.9 yards per carry. Yeah. But what I want to say is really good players, when we say regress to the mean, they don't regress all the way to the NFL mean. They often regress.
3.8, he's not going to be a 3.8 guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They regress a lot of times. Like the better thing to look at regressing them to is a career average. Now it drops off quicker for running backs, but we don't have a career average for Achane. But I can think back to multiple guys. I know a guy you and I have both talked about many times, Jamal Charles. A guy that averaged well over 5 yards per carry for his career. There are guys that can do it. And when I watch Achane, I'm like, okay, great. He's going to regress, but I don't think, to your point, he's not going to all of a sudden be 3.8 yards per carry. Like I've still got him projected right now for 5 yards per carry, which is I've already drastically brought him down from 7.9 yards per carry, right? The other thing
that's a yard less than I have him projected for. I have him for 6.
Dude, so, I'm serious. Yeah. I really don't have a problem with you having him at 6. I don't. Now, our lines get used, for people that want to bet prop bets. So I'm conservative. I over regress to league averages still, but like with Achane, like I made an adjustment where I'm like, no, he's staying at least at 5. The other part that I was conservative on was really, looking at his workload. So last season he had 40% of the attempts and 53% of the route participation in games with Mostert.
Yeah.
I've only got him projected at 41 and 47%. And I think that's being conservative. As good as Mostert still is, he is 32 years old. I would still expect Achane's role to slightly grow this year. I can't tell you for sure how it's going to be. Is it going to be another 5% in the carry department? Is it going to be another 7% in the route department? I can't tell you for sure, but we also have Mike McDaniel on record multiple times already this preseason saying that Achane is forcing their hand. They're going to have to get him more involved because he did everything they wanted in the offseason program. And he's a guy that they know is just a weapon that defenses don't want to have to deal with. Defenses have nightmares thinking about Miami, and Achane can be a straw that helps stir that drink. And so I projected him, like I said, only at 41% of the attempts, 47% routes, and he still comes out at running back 13. Yeah. Right, so he still comes out as a low-end running back 1. You're getting him at the round 2-3 turn in most drafts right now. But what if, Matt, he just got to 50% of the attempts instead of 41%? So I'm still saying Mostert's still very involved, but Achane takes that slight lead, right?
He'll be in the training room, but no.
Yeah, that's what everyone says.
That's what they say.
But we don't know that.
Yeah, we don't.
And people, I talk about Austin Eckler all the time because Austin Eckler did not come into the league at 205 pounds. He came in more like at 190, 195, and it's hard to find good weights. He didn't go to the combine, so you're just looking at the pro day stuff. So when I look at a guy like Achane, like he's not at his finished state. Like when I look at his body, and that's where I'd be interested in you. Like when I just look at the lower body, I think there's definitely some thickness there. Like I feel like there's a little bit of room for Achane to actually carry weight that works, not just try to bulk up and lose it all by the time the season gets going. But my thing is, if he gets to 50%, okay, and the league average for a running back 1 on a team, not for a running back 1 in fantasy, the average running back 1 on an NFL team over the last 3 years gets 57% of the carry. So I still got him well below that. Okay. Yeah. And say his route participation goes from 53% to just 55. Okay. That's why he had 53% last year. Remember, I've got him at 47. But if I just make those 2 small adjustments, he would move all the way to running back 4 in my projections.
See, there you go.
When people talk about it, they're like, oh, well, he'll never get all the carries. I'm like, guys, it's not an either or. He doesn't have to have 65% of the carries. What if he just gets to 50%? If he gets to 50%, you're probably going to regret not taking him at the end of round 2 or in round 3 in your fantasy draft.
From a body standpoint, Terrell Davis was below 200 pounds when he entered the league. Clinton Portis was below 200 pounds when he entered the league. And both those guys finished their years as 220-pound runners who were producing as workhorses. There are examples of backs like that all the time. Yeah, I certainly like him myself. I'm not as bullish on him, but he is someone that I may need to be a little bit more bullish on as time goes on. Like I have Mostert at 169 attempts, and as a runner, I have Achane at 124. So it's not that huge of a difference in terms of where I'm at with that. But I have Mostert at almost twice the number of scores.
I've got 188 and 167. I would say you're low based on the games that they played together last year.
Yeah.
Achane was at 40% in those.
That's because I'm one of he's going to be in the training room, and I haven't projected at 13 games, which is not usual. Most people don't project that kind of thing.
Well, I've got him at 15.5. I take every running back. It starts at 15.5, and then I go down from there. So like when I say my projections, so ultimately it starts out at 46% to Mostert and 41% to Achane. Once you factor in injuries, it's 41% Mostert, 37% Achane, on the season. But I guess like my question is really, what is the floor for Achane if he's not injured?
Yeah.
And the other thing with the injury stuff, I don't get it. He was hurt 2 times last year. He was hurt once in college.
Right.
He had 1 injury in college that kept him out. So he really doesn't. It's not like he was hurt his whole college career.
I think it's more the perception that people have of the size, and they're concerned that he's going to be used in a certain role. And
but you're not other people. You're someone I actually listen to, and you're worried about him being in the training room. So I need to know if I need to adjust my expectations.
I just look at it. For me, it's more. I don't think so. In fact, I'm more thinking I'm going to adjust mine because I've looked at him, and I think you made a good argument about where he is weight-wise, how he was used, what his profile looked like. And when you look at it from that standpoint, I think that if the Dolphins are saying he's forcing our hand to use him more, that's enough for me to go, okay, they think that he can handle it. They're going to give themselves a shot. They're going to give him a shot to see if he can. And also some of it is also me looking at other players on the depth chart and going, okay, let me give them a little bit of a taste, like Jalen Wright, just to get in there. Not that he's going to.
Yeah, me too. I got Jalen Wright at 10%. I think he's going to be a factor. And you got a veteran and Jeff Wilson there. I don't know. I will say this: if Raheem Mostert, I love the way Ian puts this. We don't talk about injuries anymore, Matt. We say if he won the lottery, he hit the Powerball and didn't need to play football anymore, right?
Superstition coming in. That's great.
Yeah, gets to walk away from football. I will say this. I don't know that the Dolphins would suddenly give Achane a 65% workload. I think they would give those other guys pieces. Now, I will say we're not really great at predicting what coach is going to do. As soon as we say they won't, it's still in the range of outcomes somewhere out there. I just wouldn't say that it's like a high probability until that he would need to prove that to us. But I think that if Mostert went down, he would be a near lock to get half the carries.
Yeah, he probably would, though. I think the best running back on that depth chart between the tackles is Chris Brooks, and he probably won't even be on that team at the end of the year. At the end of this,
maybe the Cowboys could get him.
The Cowboys
need another Brooks. They need another running back too.
They do, and they need a better Brooks. And I think that
Chris they've got two Jalen's at wide receiver. One of them is a Brooks, but they really need a running back. So maybe you're onto something.
Yeah. I'm thinking maybe that's a possibility. We'll see. All right, so just pick somebody that just is on your mind that you're just like, okay, look, I've been wanting to talk about this guy for whatever reason. I'll pick something right off the bat if you need a minute. To me, Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh.
Well, this is where I was going. I was going there. So let's
really?
see what player you name.
Okay.
Maybe we'll have two different players.
Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh is fun. There's a lot we could talk about here with this. One is that my theory about Arthur Smith has been this since like week 2 or week 3 of last year, is that I don't know who was responsible for picking Desmond Ridder in Atlanta, but I do know that when I watched Arthur Smith's offense, it looked very much to me like Smith said, we have to keep things boring as fuck because we cannot trust our quarterback to make a read beyond what the blackboard told him. And that if the receivers start working across the field and there's multiple zone windows that they could access, Desmond Ridder's going to fail this test because he's open blind when it comes to like being able to make this work. So let's dull down this offense. I'll fall on my sword. It's going to piss my ego off, and everyone's going to go off on me about how I'm not getting the most out of Drake London and Kyle Pitts. But I can't throw Desmond Ridder immediately under the bus. We have nobody else there who's really going to help out. And I think that in Pittsburgh, I think we're going to see a little bit more dynamic skill in terms of at least they have a quarterback who can work post pocket, and to be able to create and have a little bit more success. And that even though he's not known for motion and and the offense still seems stodgy, even if you take away the Desmond Ridder element, he's still straightened up the room enough that there's at least some curb appeal to what's going on.
So real quick, what's very interesting about Arthur Smith, he's maddening only when it comes to player utilization, meaning Drake London never was treated like a wide receiver one from a playing time perspective.
Yep.
That's what I don't get about Arthur Smith. You spend a top 8 pick on the guy. When he's on the field, he seems to be playing well, but you got to get Kaderil Hodge out there just because. Got to give Van Jefferson some run. Oh, Mac Hollins. Well, until he started open as Yapper, and then he got his ass put on the bench. But those guys that he would just give snaps to for no reason, I never understood. Drake London is a player that should be on the field 92, 94% of your pass plays, and he was down in the low 80s. So Kyle Pitts, same thing. Now, part of that last year is coming back from injury. But Kyle Pitts was the same way. I mean, if you're going to spend top 4 pick on a tight end, well, okay, let's get him on the damn field and let him be a mismatch. Problem is you didn't have quarterback, to your point, that can take advantage of Kyle Pitts' skill set, which is an ability to vertically stretch the football game in a way really probably no other tight end right now in the NFL can do. And Kirk Cousins will probably be able to uncork that for Pitts. But what was interesting about Arthur Smith, those were his issues. Bijan last year not getting 50% of the rushing attempts. I mean, what the hell are we doing? Okay, and I like Tyler Algier, but you just drafted Bijan at pick 8. But from an X's and O's standpoint, for the things that I've studied that really add to yardage, touchdowns, also known as fantasy points, this little dirty thing we like to call fantasy football points. Football people, we're not that far apart. You guys want yards, touchdowns, catches. Guess what those things equal? Fantasy points. So I did a study on this, and play action. A play action route is worth 33% more, is worth 26% more for a wide receiver than a non-play action route. Where did Arthur Smith rank in play action over his 3 years in Atlanta? Second in the NFL. Okay. Motion at the snap. 57% for Arthur Smith. That was 4th in the NFL over his 3 years there. You know what motion at the snap is worth per route more than non-motion at the snap? For a wide receiver, 55% boost in PPR scoring per route.
Yeah.
Okay? And also, condensed, this isn't necessarily a cheat code thing, but it's good for fantasy because you don't have as many other targets to compete with, but 2 wide receiver sets versus 3 wide receiver sets where you're getting a slot wide receiver out there. If you look at that, it comes down to 29% boost per route run. Okay. He ranked 1st in 2 wide receiver personnel usage. Essentially, if you go look at a chart with all the top play callers ranked in those, what I call cheat code areas, he's ranked right there with Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniel. Yeah. So he was actually trying to do everything he could for Desmond Ridder, and a lot of those plays end up being first read plays.
Yep.
Okay. 70% of plays in the NFL are first read anyway.
Well, so that's why he was screwed, because he had a guy who couldn't read. So
the guy that couldn't make the first read. Yeah. So I think the quarterback play ultimately screwed Arthur Smith, gave him a bad rap in Atlanta. He had terrible quarterback play. It wasn't just Ridder, it was also Marcus Mariota. And Taylor Heineke was a little bit better than those two, but still, that's the struggle. And Matt Ryan was at the end of his was at the end of his game. Yeah. Matt Ryan wasn't Matt Ryan anymore when Arthur Smith got there. So that's why I'm fascinated that you brought this one up, because I think all roads here lead back to, what do you really think about Russell Wilson?
Yeah, and I feel good about him. I mean, I know that we talk about, can he throw in the middle of the field and the design, how much time he takes in an offense, but I look at just the quality of the receivers he had in Denver, and there's a reason that Denver has tried to trade both of them for 2 years.
Did you watch the film? Like, I know you probably watched some. I know asking you if you watched the film is like just like it's a rhetorical question.
Do you run the spreadsheet? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I went back and watched a ton of the Denver stuff, and I was cracking up because, like, literally Russell Wilson would drop back and he'd be like one pump fake, and he's like, "I'm running."
Yeah.
It's like, I'm just taking off. Yeah. Like, no one's doing what they're supposed to. And I mean, we're talking like, I felt like it was an immediate give up. I feel like he in his head was just like, I'm just taking matters into my own hand. Nobody here is going to be open. Nobody's running the right route. I'm out of here. I'm out of here.
I mean, and even before Sean Payton's offense, the year before, it was a disaster. There were the first 5 games where he was literally like going, I'm going to trust these guys and I'm going to do the things that we're supposed to do. And the charting was fantastic. The drops, the routes, the
and late that year they actually got on a little bit of a groove. They beat several really good teams, and he and even Jerry Jeudy had a 4 or 5 game stretch where they were cooking together, hitting those deep crossers, the things we got used to seeing, in Seattle.
I don't think Russ is done. He's done being the darling of the media from like 3 years ago, but he's not done as a football player. And the player that most intrigues me, probably, if we're going to go beyond Russ, is Calvin Austin as like a late round guy. And the reason is just from a scouting perspective, I heard everybody for years, everyone was excited about Wan'Dale Robinson as that kind of big play slot receiver who could be something. And I thought, there are 2 other players who are better than Wan'Dale Robinson who fit that same physical profile, who have more skills as route runners and pass catchers. One of them is lighting up the Canadian League in Khalil Pimpleton, and the other one is Calvin Austin, who basically, when his rookie year, everyone was commenting about, oh my God, how fast this guy is and how explosive. Then he got hurt, and then he had some isolated moments last year that intrigued. But I think that they're looking at him, and I think they're trying to figure out a way to use him a little bit more, and that makes sense when you have George Pickens, who I think is going to be a productive fantasy player, but has some things with his profile that we'll see whether he takes that to the wide receiver 1 level. I don't think he's going to quite get there. Then you have Van Jefferson, who to me is, I just laugh like father, like son. I mean, literally his dad, Sean, is a wide receiver coach, but couldn't catch the ball consistently enough to stick to one team for any length of time and be reliable. And Van has had trouble since Florida addressing and catching the football in levels that you would make him a legitimate wide receiver 2, or anything more than maybe a wide receiver 3 on a good year. And I look at Austin, and I go, could this guy be Russell Wilson's Doug Baldwin? And what was funny is Russ said there's a lot of it about him that reminds me of Tyler Lockett. So, same role in a sense. I just was thinking of
My question is, will
player.
he have the role? Because, I mean, they drafted Roman Wilson to be a vertical slot as well.
Yeah, they have, but I don't think Roman Wilson knows how to run man-to-man routes very well or get off the line of scrimmage. Now, from the slot, it may not matter if he's understanding the coverages and the work that you would see here. So there is a very good chance. I don't have Austin projected for anything much, because I'm not like telling people, go out and get Calvin Austin and make it a priority.
No, I love this kind of stuff because always trying to think of like someone else to take in the very last round of a best ball draft. And I'll be honest, I have not clicked on Calvin Austin, and maybe I'll sprinkle some in.
Yeah, I think Roman Wilson's the guy they want to shoehorn in there, but I think Calvin Austin, the thing that separated him from, say, like Wan'Dale Robinson in terms of how they look, they looked like similar players. They looked like twins in almost everything, except Austin was a little bit more explosive, is that Austin actually can win one-on-one on the outside, even in college, that in a way that Wan'Dale could never do. And he could go up and win the ball in terms of, and also win press coverage and look good as a vertical route runner. And I think that he's the type of player that if we see a little more inventive use from him, he's the guy that maybe if they do add motion, which we're probably not going to see, if they did add motion, he'd be the guy that I think would make the most sense.
No, Arthur Smith runs a ton of motion,
well,
so I think you can expect you're going to see a ton of it.
Well, then he's the guy that I think would make the most sense to be used that way. And so you're going to get him in the short passing game. You're going to get him a little bit in the run game. And you may also get him moved outside at certain matchups where you can have winning matchups either from the slot or outside in the vertical game. Whereas with Roman Wilson, I don't trust him to get off the line of scrimmage. I don't trust him to win with setups with stems against man coverage. I don't think he really he's one of those guys that as a route runner, I thought he was bad. And that he needed work in certain areas it's improvable, but I think he's more of a long-term bet, and I think they're going to figure that out by week 5. By week 5,
Camp News hasn't been super positive, or any of the OTA stuff on Roman Wilson. I mean, it sounds like he's getting coached pretty hard. It sounds like they're really trying to push him.
Yeah, he needs it. He's like Scott. I wouldn't be surprised if Scotty Miller gets more love in Pittsburgh with the ball than Roman Wilson does this year. Down the line, maybe more. But I would be surprised if one is, and also if you're just going to read the tea leaves of the media, they keep talking about, are we going to need to trade for another wide receiver? Which means that they're hearing a lot of things from coaches that isn't very positive about this core. And I'm not surprised why, because Van Jefferson and Roman Wilson aren't the answers there, and Miller really isn't the answer either. So you got Pickens and who else? And I think the guy that the team probably has been quietly liking, but he doesn't fit the profile because he's short and small, is Austin. And they don't want to lean on a guy like that. But he's the guy that they could wind up leaning on and going, wow, okay, we had low expectations, more special teams oriented, but there could be something there. So if you've got a late pick and you need somebody you want to take a chance on, that's the guy I'm looking at.
Yeah, I was going to mention Pickens, but we can hit him real quick and move on. I think it really comes back to Russ. I have concerns that Russ is, cooked. I agree with you on the challenges last year though with the Denver receivers, and that's the thing that I think leaves him with an out. I think you could probably argue that no player in the NFL has been more impacted by how defenses have evolved over the last 3 to 4 seasons than Russ, because it's not so much about too deep looks, it's about how deep the safeties are right at the snap of the ball. The deepest safety is just playing so much deeper than they used to. It's like a center fielder, I mean, they're not really playing the run game at all in many scenarios, and that takes away Russ's that moon ball, right? That's just so perfectly placed. It leaves your television screen like a punt. I mean, you're like, there it comes down right in the basket of a smaller player, being covered by a huge DB. And that's something that now those plays are more often into double coverage, right? Yeah. So you're not getting the single coverage outside, single high looks as often as you used to. And when you do, the safeties are there really being coached up to take away the big play. Or you're getting, cover 4, all these other different variations, of what's going on with defense. So when you look at Russ, I mean, that's my big concern. Like his money play has always been the deep crosser and then the moon ball on a vertical route. And those two routes might be the most 2 impacted routes in all of football. So I have concerns there, but like with Pickens, if Russ isn't cooked, I mean, he's got things that are similar to DK Metcalf, and some of his flaws are similar to DK Metcalf. The things he does really well, he does really well. Can he be a complete route runner that does everything? I don't know, maybe not. But I will say that last year in the games and in the year before when they didn't have Deontay Johnson, they actually opened up his route tree. He was successful in a lot of those ways. Was he perfect? Probably not. But he handled a much larger, variety of routes in the games without Deontay Johnson. He had a 26% target share in plays without Deontay Johnson on the field over the last 2 seasons. So Pickens is that guy right now. He's going in rounds 4, depending on where you guys are drafting. And we've got a cool ADP tool over at Fantasy Life. You can see all the different ADPs for the players across different sites. But I mean, he's going anywhere. If you're drafting in best ball, he's going in round 4. You're drafting more in a home league, you're looking at rounds 5 and 6. For a guy going in that range, if Russ suddenly isn't cooked and he still has 4,000 yard passing upside to get to 4,000 yards in a season, in that scenario, I think George Pickens would have a shot at being a wide receiver 1. If he's more around 3,500 yards, you're looking at a good wide receiver 2.
That's where I have him.
If they're stuck like in the basement down towards 3,200 yards where they just run the ball all the time like Arthur Smith did in Atlanta, then you might have more of a wide receiver 3 on your hands. I think Pickens has enough skill set to look at him as being a low end to mid range wide receiver 2 right now. But it will depend on Russ which way he goes from there. He could climb into being a wide receiver 1, or he ends up being a wide receiver 3 that you're really frustrated with when to put him in your lineup.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you brought up that's a great point is about the coverages and what Russ was good at. There are 2 areas where Russell Wilson is underrated at what he did, but Pete Carroll's offenses didn't really give him enough of these looks, and I thought he was really strong at the intermediate to deep seam. I thought he was very good at and consistently good at that. They just didn't have a tight end to attack those on a regular basis. Late career Jimmy Graham doesn't qualify, as much. And then also the sail route, and I would see some of the more impressive throws I saw from Russ during his career were routes like that can work out reasonably well against some of these coverages. And I think that he has some of the players that he could access this with. But we'll see if that gets incorporated into his game. I have him at about 3,500 yards right now as my projection for him. And then Pickens I have him probably more optimistic than I should, but at about 1,200 yards and getting a lot of deep looks.
I like being optimistic on Pickens. He's of wide receivers that get taken in the first 4 rounds of fantasy drafts, he's my most drafted.
Gotcha. So, this is another ugly team in a way that I'm just interested in that maybe I get some of your commentary on. Another former Arthur Smith haunt, and that's Tennessee. Is there anybody with Tennessee that you're like, okay, I'm excited or I'm not as excited about as other people are? I'm interested in your thoughts on Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, and then also this backfield split. Because you're hearing that this is going to be a true split of roles, not just like, okay, we're going to have Raheem Mostert as Mr. Inside and Devon Achane as Mr. Big Play outside in space, even though there's some mixture in between with those guys. With Pollard, Spears, it sounds like they're saying, really, we're giving them the same type of responsibilities. We're just splitting it down the middle at this point. Yeah. So what's your thoughts on this offense? I mean, do you think Will Levis can do it? And if he can't or gets somewhere in between, is there anybody you're looking at and going, yeah, I still think that they're good options for fantasy, for the value?
If Brian Callahan just comes in and tries to run an offense like Zac Taylor did, I don't think there's a chance.
Right.
But honestly, I think Zac Taylor is one of the worst head coaches in the league as far as like doing things to help his players out. There's just easy buttons that the data has shown that you could be pressing as a head coach. We've already talked about them: motion, play action, the way you align your receivers, the bunch sets, giving them the variety to break in or out, making defenses just have to think about everything.
Condensing plays, yeah.
Yes. Oddities before the snap that makes a linebacker go, okay, trying to get his call right, and then you get the ball snapped. All these little bitty edges that give you a slight edge as a quarterback right before or right after the snap of the football that creates space for your teammates. And really, Zac Taylor's done none of those things. Now, he's not had to because he has Joe Burrow and he has Jamar Chase and he has T. Higgins. So he's been able to really rest on his laurels, if you will. But what's funny, he didn't come from that. He came from Sean McVay, who does all of these things for Matt Stafford. So I don't understand Zac Taylor. So when I look at Callahan, I see a lot of people, and they're like, oh, he comes from Zac Taylor's offense. That's a really good offense. They drop back to pass the ball way over expected. They're going to be a pass-heavy team. Well, what I found in my research is the number one driver of being a pass-heavy team, like in neutral situations, is your quarterback is good. Yeah. It's not the most coordinators or coaches, they're going to base how much they're going to throw the ball in a neutral situation on how good their quarterback is. And so that's still really going to be up to Will Levis, because if you look at Will Levis from last year, there were definitely some flashes, but overall, he's not ready to drop back and throw the ball 65% of the time. Yeah. That's not going to be a winning formula unless he has made tremendous. And we've seen this before, unless he's made like Josh Allen strides in this offseason. The year that Josh Allen went from not having Stephon Diggs to getting him. Like, does Calvin Ridley somehow help transform Will Levis to like that level, which I think, anytime you start pointing to outliers like that, you get yourself into trouble, because most of the time guys don't improve that much based off of one move. So what I'll say is this: I think the offense is going to throw the ball more than last year, but that's not saying a lot because they've had Mike Vrabel, one of the most run-heavy coaches, period, no matter who was at his quarterback for over the last 5 seasons in the NFL. So it's going to go up. My question is, what is Brian Callahan doing in these other things that will make life easy for Will Levis? Because in my opinion, if you're just going to line up and say, even though you have Hopkins, who is aging and has started to show signs of wear and tear, you got Calvin Ridley, nice player, he can do some really nice things, so you've got 2 good weapons there. And then you add Tyler Boyd, you got Chigo Okonkwo, you got the 2 running backs. I think you have a competent receiving group if they're all healthy. I think you have enough to stress an NFL defense. My question is if they just come out in all these wide alignments, everybody's spread out, just 3 wide receivers, I don't know that like gets Will Levis to where we want him to be. I think you're going to need to do some other things to really try to help him out. So I kind of reserve opinion. Ultimately, I'm a little under the market, I think, on pretty much all of these players. I don't mind where they go in drafts, but I'm not quick to be clicking on Tennessee players. Now, in a best ball draft, like I get, Calvin Ridley, and then I happen to draft DeAndre Hopkins, then I'm going to come back and draft Will Levis, because I've just basically said on this team I'm betting on the Tennessee offense. But it's not a strategy I'm deploying all the time. So I'm not as I don't know that anybody in the industry is super bullish, but I would say I'm slightly pessimistic versus the market, and most of it does come back to Will Levis. Again, not saying he can't do it. And so I'm just really interested in your thoughts on Will Levis and if you think that he can progress and make that next step, because I think it really does just come down to him.
I think 3,500 yards is his ceiling, and I have him at his ceiling. And I think the touchdowns is about 18. I don't see him hitting 20 touchdowns, even with Ridley and Hopkins on name. I think the run game will have to pace this, and I feel like I'm overly optimistic with the run game too. I feel like they are the discount Bengals, and I didn't even mean this with Zac Taylor. I meant it as, you look at all these players and they go, what does all this have in common? And I go, the Titans are cheap as fuck. Like, they're picking players that they can get discounts on, and not really, they're not going after guys that I think are top quality. They go, the shine has come off some of these guys. Let's see if we can get some magic out of them.
They sure did pay Calvin Ridley quite a bit.
Well, that tells you also about them, the way Cincinnati probably often was in the past in Mike Brown's regimes at times, is that they pick the wrong player to be too high on. And I say that is that Ridley is a good wide receiver, but I don't think that his big year in Atlanta is who he really is. I think he has catch point issues. I think he has some route issues. I think he comes up short in big moments that you rely on as a wide receiver one, and he would be in Jacksonville, I think, if they saw him as such. I know they're saying, well, they couldn't afford him, and maybe they wanted to go a smarter route. Sure, you could make that argument. And I still think Ridley's going to get like 140 targets in the neighborhood of 80 catches and close to 1,100 yards. I just think that people see him as like a Stephon Diggs peak player, and I don't think he's quite there. So I think that they made a good call, and like if we can get a discount Stephon Diggs, that's fine. But you're not going to get Stephon Diggs. You're going to get some broken parts with that you're going to be like, that's a little nagging. But he had a good year, and it's, I don't know. I'm just not he's not a guy that I go, is he going to be a surprise? Is he going to be a surprise wide receiver one, and I'm going to get a wide receiver one out of this? No. What you pay for is probably the best that you'll get out of him. So
yeah, the challenge I had last year with Levis, and he's one of these guys, every week DeAndre Hopkins would pop up in a lot of the metrics we care about, air yards and all these things, and then you'd go watch the game, you're like, well, hell, like that wasn't even in the ballpark, of DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, the intent was still there.
Yeah.
As your other co-host Adam Hartstead says, like the main thing we're looking for is intent, and it was there, but still when you watch it and it's like airmailed by 10 yards, you're like, okay, like so. And that's consistently seeing that. It's like, okay, so how much really is a target from Will? That's what it brings me back to. How much is a target from Will Levis really worth? Yeah. It's definitely not anywhere near, obviously, like a Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow or these other guys, unless he makes drastic steps. I'm a little higher than you are on them. It was funny, as I felt like I talked pretty negatively. I've got him at 3,700 yards, but I would agree. Like I don't. It would be crazy for him to really go that much higher than that.
Yeah.
I've got him at 60% pass rate. I've seen some people like putting him at 63 and 65% because Callahan comes from an offense where over the last 3 years he was at 65%. Again, guys, they don't have Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
They're not throwing the ball 65%. And that's even with me accounting for the fact that we only think they're winning 6.5 games. So I have them playing in trailing game scripts and at a 60% pass rate. So that actually tells you I think they're going to be below drop back rate over expectation or right around neutral this year based on like all of the issues. I will say this. Callahan came out and said they want to throw it more, and at least all, to your other buddy, Sigmund Bloom, he talks about the steady drum beat, right? The breadcrumbs that we're following throughout the offseason. They said they want to throw the ball more. They said they want to let Will Levis do his thing. And then they went out and they did add Calvin Ridley to go along with DeAndre Hopkins. They added another passing down back in Tony Pollard to go with Tajay Spears. So they have aligned enough things that I kind of split the middle with where this team used to be versus what the Bengals have done. And so that's why I think I'm slightly higher than where you are.
So anybody out there with graphic design skills that would like to make a t-shirt, I have an idea for you. And that's that you take the Minions from the Disney film, and instead of the little helmet heads, you take photoshopped images of Sigmund Bloom in different states and have minions of that, and I will buy a couple, and I will definitely give one to Joe Bryant because I'm sure he would rock this one. Sigmund Bloom, the Minions, and you could have him. One of them, you should have him in a Gretel-like wig, like with the Wendy's ponytail, pigtails type of thing, because you referenced like the narrative of like breadcrumbs. You could have like the Hansel and Gretel kind of thing.
Yeah.
You could have Bloom in all those different states. With that,
and the Minions all sitting on with those backdrops, but somehow on a couch.
Yep, all on a couch. Yep, like you could have Bloom in the middle and then surrounded by all his little minions, or you could have Joe on the couch and have Bloom be the minions. Something like that. You're welcome. Not sure it's going to be a big money maker for you, but it'll be popular in our industry.
It'll be very niche.
Sure. But... Yeah, it'd be very niche, but we'd have fun. I'll take it. But yeah, no, I mean I'm with you. I like I like where you're heading with it. I'm probably one of those ones that with looking at Levis and going, yeah, I had him at 63.6%, but I get your point, and I think that makes sense that you're looking at what Zac Taylor isn't and what Will Levis hasn't been. So it gives me a chance to kind of lower
and again, you have to be careful with these things because Callahan may just have a very different idea, even though he's been under Zac Taylor.
Yeah.
Because he was more of a he kept everything moving from a standpoint. He kept all the offensive meetings going, gets everything implemented during the week. He's helping come up with the game plan, but Zac Taylor's still calling the game. So we sometimes see these guys that come out from under another coach and they actually, are nothing like the coach they came out from under. So, I mean, these things can be tricky.
For sure. And I do like, though, that we came out of this segment thinking that really the best way to describe Zac Taylor is that he's a Sean McVay flunky as opposed to like a Sean McVay acolyte.
Could you imagine Jamar Chase getting to do the things that Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and these other guys get to do? Motion, getting to operate from the slot more often. He would destroy. But no, let's just line him up out. Yeah,
I'm not that. I can't be allowed to be that optimistic when it comes to football anymore. If I could, I would be. That would be insane. I'm totally with you. Now, a guy I am very optimistic about who came from LSU is Malik Nabers. But even in this Giants offense that to me looks like not that great, and I don't think anybody really looks at this team as that very good. Not that great. But you look at the wide receiver depth chart, and before Malik Nabers, I look at this and go, Jalen Hyatt, deep threat, probably not going to see him expand his game to be much more than that this year. We'll see. Maybe we'll make some strides. Isaiah Hodgins, zone player who works in the underneath area. Can make some contested catches occasionally when he isn't clapping onto the ball and attacking it weirdly. Darius Slayton, I mean, this was your wide receiver 1. He should probably be a low end wide receiver 2 at best, though he's improved his game. He's not the guy. Allen Robinson, I mean, we don't know where he's really gone since Chicago. At this stage, so I don't think he's going to get it back. And then I've already mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson as an overrated kind of option. You look at that team and you go, wow, that's a disaster of a depth chart for an NFL team. And then you add Malik Nabers to it, and suddenly I look at it and go, okay, well, at least there's a place where the rest of these guys actually have a fit. Like they could actually fit into a role. Doesn't mean that they're the best options for that type of role that you could get from somewhere else. But Nabers as a primary, I'm with that even this year. And if he's going to get the volume, I'm still looking at him as a 1,000-yard receiver off the bat as a rookie. I could see him as a 80 catch, 1,000-yard, 7 touchdown receiver. I'd take him over. I'd probably take him where people are. I mean, I haven't looked at value. I don't remember value right off the bat, but I have to imagine he's getting drafted after Calvin Ridley or in the same area. And if
he goes before, people are on him.
Oh, they're on him.
Yeah, Malik Nabers right now, like in best ball drafts, goes anywhere from the end of round 2 to the middle of round 3. You go to home leagues, you start looking at ESPN and Yahoo, you start getting a bigger discount. Even like over in FFPC, you're getting him in round 4. Yeah. So it really depends on the site, but anywhere from late round 2 to round 5.
Well, for the sharps out there, then we know they're on him. But for the home league people who are listening to this show, who are in depth, then yeah, he's a value, and I think that's where I'm at. I don't even think Daniel Jones can fuck him up, and so I mean,
that's good because that's going to be who's throwing into the ball as long as he can stay healthy.
Yeah, and I think that as long as I don't have Drew Lock projected for anything right now, but I'm
going to tell Ian he's going to be pissed at you.
But I do believe that Drew Lock is going to take over for that. For me, I think Drew Lock. Drew Lock said all the right things, but he's the bridge until they find the next quarterback, and I think that there's an outside chance that he could be that next quarterback. It's still low, Ian, but it's but I'm open to the idea because I think that Drew Lock has the skills. He needed the right mindset, and I think that there's a possibility he's acquired that. We'll see.
So real quick, Nabers, for you guys listening, if you're drafting on ESPN, pick 64. That's good, right? Yahoo, pick 71. You look at Sleeper, pick 38. Underdog, pick 27. FFPC, pick 47. So that's kind of your range on him. The sharper the draft is, honestly, or the more that drafters have already been drafting, not necessarily saying it's sharper or less sharp, but in the markets where the drafting has happened the most, which is best ball, he's going the highest.
They're
and
like,
those are 3 wide receiver leagues,
Yeah.
so you have to start 3 wide.
they're like, I think these leagues are kind of like dog breeders. Like if you're just someone that has a dog and you just appreciate the dog for what he is, you're probably in one of these ESPN leagues. You know, you're probably more like that. But then like these other leagues like Sleeper and all these things that we have sponsorships with, you know, not we, but people in this industry, then you're starting to look at like dog shows. And that's when things get like amped up, and now they're dressing these dogs up and hyper attending to these high anxiety ridden, you know, overbred, animals that like you think just need a yard and a bone and some time to chill out a little bit. And I think that's kind of those leagues get a little reactive. I'll just put it that way. As you can see, I'm not sponsored by anybody, so that's why
I love
say that.
For what it's worth, dog breeder or dog show person, I love Malik Nabers either way. Whether you're either one of those, I have him projected for 131 targets.
I've got 127.
This season. I've got him projected for 1,017 yards, and then I got him at 4.7, so 5 touchdowns. You know, that's the Daniel Jones. You know, is, to your point, like that's like the governor. That's the governor on the offense. Yeah. It's going to be tough to like fully cut the throttle open. What I will say about Daniel Jones is like his accuracy has been surprisingly decent. Like that hasn't been the challenge. What Daniel Jones has not really been able to do yet is figure out how to convert from just being a guy that can avoid turnovers to also being able to make the big plays when things are there for him.
He's pocket deaf, and he takes too much time, gets hits. And this offensive line is going to have to lead the way. I mean, that's pure football for anybody. But, you know, can those 2 early round tackles, the early round center, and their 2 free agent guards, can they give above average play? If they can give above average play, Jones can give you 3,600 yards, maybe 20 touchdowns. If they play lights out, maybe Jones can give you a little bit more. But I don't think he needs more to be decent. If he gets great, he'll be like above average. But he won't be elite.
I mean, so he's averaged 215 passing yards per game, which is terrible. I mean, that's his career average right now. But if he could get, and I've got him projected for 215 this year. But if he did somehow throw for, 235, 240 yards per game, like if he was suddenly able to have that kind of a season, Malik Nabers as the primary target in this offense, and I don't think it's going to be close, would have an opportunity to push towards a wide receiver 1 finish, and could even finish ahead of a guy that people are taking clearly ahead of him, which is Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, and I have Nabers close to you, like 127 targets, 82 catches, 1,022 yards. I have 7 touchdowns. But I'm also counting on. I haven't put it in my projections, but I'm counting on Drew Lock to be in the game, at least for the final 6 to 7 weeks. I think that there's a real possibility that could happen. I'm mining shitty teams because, like, everybody wants to hear you talk about how good folks are, but that's not going to help you in drafts because we know, like, who the good teams are, So and
their players go early.
Yeah, typically. Their players go early. So whatever. Like New England.
You know who the 49ers are.
New England is the dregs of society right now, if you ask me. You've got Ramondre Stevenson and a trash heap.
All right, if we're talking about New England, this has to be a dual segment. We're talking about we need an NFC team as well, and I nominate the Panthers.
Okay.
All right. I'm good. Let's talk about these 2. Okay. But we'll start with Patriots.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts here? Can Jacoby support anybody in this passing game? And is he going to give way to Drake May very quickly? And then we go look at that and go, what are your thoughts on May? And who's your late bet to go? All right, sure, I'll take the shot, or at least comb the waiver wire and say, I'll be picking up a Jalen Polk or a Javon Baker or a KJ Osborne, or maybe Juju somehow sticks onto this team, or Kendrick Bourne comes back from his knee injury. I mean, there's more ifs here than like someone with a lottery, with the winning lottery number at your local convenience store.
Yeah, I love Jalen Polk. I liked him as a prospect, but now he lands on a roster where there's just not much competition, to be honest. I mean, Juju is a shell of himself. Kendrick Bourne is recovering from an ACL and honestly has never been an elite player. He's been more of a great complimentary guy. So now, like, as an aging veteran coming off an injury, I don't really expect, Kendrick Bourne to be like this obstacle. Like, he might get an 18-20% target share, but he's not going to be a target hog where like a guy like Polk can't like arrive on the scene. Tyquan Thornton stinks. Jalen Reagor stinks. They never seem to get what we think they would normally, get out of their tight ends, even though they keep trying to add different guys. So I think Polk, when you look at him, he didn't grade out really great in the Fantasy Life wide receiver supermodel, but part of it is because, like, while the model does calibrate based on the teammates that you had to try to earn targets from, there are certain situations where it probably doesn't calibrate enough. And I think when you look at Washington, that's one of those. This is a guy that played with Rome Odunze. Everybody knows the number 8 pick overall in the draft. And you also had another day 2 pick and Jalen McMillan, who was a really good slot wide receiver for the Huskies. So when I look at Jalen Polk, I think there's a player that, is he going to stretch out the field and be this huge vertical threat? No, but he can play all levels of the field with competence, like based on like what the data says about him. He's pretty good with the ball in his hands. He's not elite is what's interesting about Polk in really any of the areas, but I think he's above average across all the areas. And that makes him a guy that you can have broad application within your offense. It means you can ask him to do a lot of different things. So when I look at the depth chart, I'm like, man, Jalen Polk is a great bet to me. And if you're drafting like over on ESPN or some of these other sites that we talk about, like Jalen Polk is a guy that you can take with your last round pick, if you need a wide receiver and that you feel like that's what you need. Right now on Sleeper, he's picked 161, ESPN 169. Even over at the FFPC in these high stakes leagues, pick 182. Jalen Polk is going too late. Now, I will say the guy that gets me the most excited when I just watch them is Javon Baker.
Yeah.
When I watch Javon Baker play football, you can't help, you've mentioned this to me in the past, like how certain guys just have like this, the way they move and this attitude, kinetic energy. Yes, is what you said. You talk about the old football game where you would place all your players out there and turn it on and they start vibrating on the like that. Jalen Polk is like the guy that when I watch and I'm like, okay, like the ceiling I feel like is really there for Jalen Polk. The floor is probably also nothing. I mean, with where he got taken in the draft and some of the issues that teams had with him. But I do feel like for Polk, I would prefer it be Drake May at some point, even though he has holes in his game, just because I feel like he's more likely to be able to uncork like some of the big play stuff down the field. Jacoby Brissett is going to come out. He's going to listen to his coach, Jared Mayo. He's going to try not to make mistakes. He's going to keep everything between the lines. We're going to try to win close football games, let our defense play, hope the ball bounces our way, and we're going to try to scratch out 7 wins. Unfortunately for the Patriots, if you look at their schedule out of the gate, sorry, Jacoby, you're probably going to be on the bench by like week 4 or 5. Like it's a brutal start. And so I think once you know how it goes, all intentions at that point are out the window because the fan base is going nuts. Everybody's like, the owner's now in your office saying, we got to keep people coming to the games for the rest of the year. I got freaking bills to pay, man. So you're gonna have to get Drake May's ass out there.
Those marketing subsidies that they get, he's fine. He just needs to cut down on the massage rooms, and we're okay.
They're gonna want Drake May on the field.
Yeah.
Everybody's gonna be asking for it. So, and I know you've got there's some major holes obviously in Drake May's game, but what I will say that he has that is really good for fantasy. If you're talking about late year or middle of the year, you find out that Drake May is now going to become the starter. This guy had 14% of the design rushing attempts in college, second to only Jaden Daniels in this class, and an 11% scramble rate, also second to only Jaden Daniels in this class. So he is going to add value on the ground. I'm not saying this guy is an elite running prospect, but what I'm saying is he's going to give you value. He's going to be one of these guys that's more in the range of like
Mitchie Trubisky.
Yeah, he's going to give you 25 rushing yards per game, right? And occasionally he's going to score 2 rushing touchdowns for you. So it's that those little things though add up, right? Yeah. Because if you can get that baseline of that's 2.5 fantasy points, and if you throw in a touchdown here or there, suddenly you're at an extra 3 fantasy points per game. And then whenever you get a decent passing week, you get 20 fantasy points, right? Instead of getting 15. So when I look at Drake May, like I don't get super excited about. You're not drafting him in a home league right now. He's a waiver wire guy, right? Best ball people draft him. But the guy I like really is Jalen Polk. And then I think the guy that way late or off the waiver wire would be Javon Baker.
Nice. Yeah, I'm definitely a Javon Baker fan. And I think a lot of it, we saw the issues had to do with his dad. So we'll see if that actually turns into something. His dad showing up at the facility, or are we going to be able to like keep things quelled? But Baker certainly is the guy that has my eye. And I like what you said about Polk. I mean, I think that's accurate. That he's good at a lot of things. He's not great at any single thing. I think he could, if they can find a passing game here, that offensive line is going to really have to be able to be effective running the ball, and that defense is going to have to play lights out for Brissett to stay. So I get that. I mean, because you saw what Cleveland was about and what they were able to keep with him, and that's because they had a fantastic ground game.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah. So, all right, let's move on to Carolina. If we're going to go from one trash heap to another, looking at this, Adam Thielen had a great year for a guy nobody expected anything from in terms of just raw data. The raw stats of like what you look for fantasy. He had he played way above expectation. Now they get Deontay Johnson and Xavier Legette. You have Jonathan Brooks, the main rookie, added to the equation here. Will he even be ready to start the season? I don't think so. I think you may see 12 games out of him at best, mainly because whenever I hear, I'll be ready for the season, and you suffered your ACL tear in November, I'm like, yeah, bullshit. You think you're going to be ready. You're in your early 20s, and you think you're ready for anything right now.
By the end of the year, when you're trying to win your fantasy championship,
that could be
Jonathan
a different
Brooks might
story.
very well be ready, and he might be what you need, but we'll get to that.
Totally. So talk on that. Why do you think that?
Well, I think that one other thing here, so you mentioned added Deontay Johnson, draft Xavier Legette. So whether or not you think he is a first-round pick, like I didn't think he should have been a first-round pick, but like he was. I thought he was probably a round 2 pick. They added him, so the intention is there to try to make this offense better for Bryce Young. And then the other thing is you had Damian Lewis, a good guard, and Robert Hunt from the Dolphins. Yep. You give Robert Hunt a big contract. And one of the big issues last year for Bryce Young was so much immediate pressure, and not just from the outside, right up the middle, right in your lap, right away. And especially for a guy that, is not a tall player, that can be difficult. But what I'll say is, like, Bryce Young showed a lot of good things, like in college, and his ability to handle a pocket that was reasonable. Now obviously Alabama's pockets were often pristine, so it's also hard to know what's going to happen when this thing happens, which is what can be the case when you get to the pros. But when I look at the Carolina offense, like, I think there's an argument we could make that really, is there any offense that is as improved as this one with the number of players they made? We may not love all of them. They may have questions, but overall, I mean, offensive linemen, and you added weapons in the rushing attack and in the receiving game. And so I kind of went back. It got me curious. I was like, all right, let's go back and look like at some of these rookie quarterbacks, or just look at quarterbacks in general, that just, they stunk. I mean, because there's really no other way to put it. Like, Bryce Young stunk last year.
Sure.
If you want to jump in, like, and you have any thoughts there on Bryce Young, and maybe I'm overstating it, but from a fantasy perspective, like,
I think statistically he stunk, but like on tape you can see the mitigating factors, and I understand the pristine pockets at Alabama, but let's put it this way, that they're pristine relative to college, but in college he still saw enough pressure that you could look at and project and say, this guy can function in a pocket just like you opened up with.
Yeah, and there were so many things I loved about him coming out. So I'm with you. When I look at it, all the stats stunk, but then I look at the offense and I'm like, I don't know how I completely hold this against him. It was one of the maybe the worst offensive environment in the league. I think it might be between that and what Russell Wilson faced, in Denver. The Patriots were also another really bad. So some of the teams we've already discussed, on the show.
And you have an owner sending play calls on napkins from the box. So, I mean, like, you add that in, and that tells you enough about the environment they're in. The guy's stopping into local stores because he sees the signs outside on the I mean, this is obviously, like, you've got Michael Scott as your manager,
Yeah. It's happening. I'm sending another play down.
Yeah.
But it got me to thinking, what about some of these other quarterbacks that failed as rookies and then their teams really made concerted moves in the offseason to upgrade? And I didn't go look at all the offensive lineman stuff, but I mean, we know that's here. I didn't look at running backs. I just looked at wide receivers. They tried to get them more people to throw the ball to, because I think we can agree last year it was just Adam Thielen, and he was mostly working from the slot. Once other teams figured out, okay, all they have is Thielen, they just took that away.
Yeah. They
struggled. Okay, so Carson Wentz scored 14.2 fantasy points per game. The team added Alshon Jeffrey. He went to 22.1. I'm not saying this is – remember, they're also having to make steps forward in their second season, but people immediately throw Bryce Young out. They say, oh, quarterbacks that have stunk in year one just typically stink forever. So I'm just giving you some examples here. Carson Wentz, people said he stunk. Then he was really good, and then he stunk again, let's be honest.
I just told you he stunk for a while, but okay, anyway, keep going.
Trevor Lawrence, 13.1 fantasy points per game. What do the Jaguars go out and do? They add Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. He goes to 18.6 fantasy points per game. Derek Carr, 13.3 fantasy points per game. What do? They draft Amari Cooper in round 1 of the draft. They add Michael Crabtree from the 49ers. Goes from that 13.3 to 18 fantasy points per game. Jared Goff didn't even know where the sun rose or set, and he scored 9.3 fantasy points per game as a rookie. They add Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods. He goes to 17.9. Oh, yes, they did also add Sean McVay, so there is a big change there. Trevor Lawrence also experienced a coach change, moving over to Doug Peterson. And then we have Bryce Young experiencing a coach change this year with Dave Canales, who's already talked about being more bullish around the run game, trying to help balance out the offense, do things he can to help Bryce Young out. So my big point being here is, like, I really am curious as to what you saw on the film with Bryce Young, because, like, when you look at this and these other teams historically, it doesn't guarantee Bryce Young is going to be great, but I think he's taken a step forward this year, and people shouldn't. I would rather take Bryce Young than a lot of other guys that are going at the end of fantasy drafts. He was the number 1 pick for a reason. If you looked at him at Alabama, if you look at disguise coverages, something you see more and more in the NFL is giving quarterbacks fits, but the elite guys figure it out. At Alabama, Bryce Young was amazing at handling disguise coverages. He was amazing against pressure. He was great about off-script plays, scrambling outside of the pocket. Yeah, he was so good in so many ways. Like, I can't dismiss all the things that I saw and all the data points that I researched on him, even though year one was so bad.
Yeah, you need to have some semblance of a pocket to be able to be good off script. You know, you got to at least have a starting point of, like, being able to, like, stand in there and avoid pressure, not just be avoiding it right off the bat. Bryce Young didn't have the footwork and drop back issues or accuracy issues downfield that Carson Wentz had. Carson Wentz, after the first couple of games, they realized they needed to stop having him drop back and have him playing a pistol and throw the ball under 30 yards and have quick hitting plays, and his game took off as that second year progressed. And then teams kind of caught up with what he can and can't do when they disguise that. It's kind of like they Robert Griffined him a little bit in terms of what they did there. And with Goff, I mean, I think McVay, you've heard my whole story about that. It's just that McVay probably was like, this is our number 1 overall pick. You've got to work with him. And McVay was probably like, that's not the guy I really want, but I'm going to go ahead and micromanage him and put a mic in the helmet, and we're going to fix this offense and make it good, but I'm going to be in his ear all the time. So then the limitations were when you put him in against the Robert Flores blitzing defense, and you've got a coach in your ear, you know, there's going to be a ceiling that's limited. And I think McVay did a great job, but McVay also looked at his Goff as kind of an anchor to what he really wanted to do, and never really gave Goff the credit to see if he could grow and develop and be more. And I think Detroit did. Detroit said, we threw everything at him, and we realized that he did more than what we expected, because we were like, whatever, we gave away Stafford, we got him as a bridge. Let's fucking see if he can actually be worth the shit, you know. So let's give him everything. If not, we're going to move on anyway. That's our expectation. And to much their surprise, they were like, he did everything and more than what we expected. And I think that's part of it, is that McVay got this guy and it was like, probably was told he's no good. I don't think he's any good. I'm going to make lemons out of lemonade. And then he always saw him as lemonade. and not give him a chance to grow. And when you're in an industry that you're in like that, I get it. So, both turned out okay. But I think with Young, Young moves the pocket well. He anticipates well. He doesn't have a gun. He's more Goff-like in that stance where he's not he doesn't have a great arm, but he has a good enough arm. He's more like Wentz in the ability to maneuver in and out of a pocket to an extent, but maybe a little bit more dynamic than Wentz can be and a little bit better in the pocket. So, and then like Lawrence, he doesn't have that athletic ability that Lawrence had. But I think what you said in common makes total sense. And when I watched that Carolina tape, really? There are a lot of times people weren't open. Pressure was there pretty quickly. It wasn't fair to look at him and say he was bad as much as it was fair to look at him and say he had bad surrounding talent, and what you would expect from a quarterback, he had no chance to show. So you still have to go off the college tape and say, let's see him get a better infrastructure. So for now, I see him as a 3,600-yard player, maybe knocking on 3,700 yards. I think he can throw for more than 20 touchdowns with this offense around him. And that's, maybe that doesn't put him in the range of, startable quarterback in terms of every week, but he's going to be a guy that teams are going to have on their rosters, and they're going to be using him on good matchups. And I think and we're going to see the promise of him and go, oh, maybe we were too hasty.
Well, yeah, and I think the big part of it is if you have that confidence in him, then it's really about all the other pieces. Deontay Johnson is my most drafted wide receiver in fantasy right now. Okay. Just because the guy goes too late. Yeah. Is he a perfect prospect? No. We talked about some of the things with Garrett Wilson that ultimately have probably held Deontay Johnson back from being a consistent high-end performer, but he's got a wide receiver 8 overall finish on his resume. Yeah. He earns targets at a wide receiver 1 level. The guy gets open. Dave Canales is saying that, hey, basically their offense is, where's Deontay Johnson? He's the guy that they want to make the focal point. So anytime you got a coach that wants to do that on top of a player that already has shown that they can just go out and earn targets, and every quarterback they've played with ever in their life wants to throw to them because usually good things happen for them versus the other options they have on the team. I think Deontay Johnson is an absolute steal right now in fantasy drafts. Now, he's got to stay healthy. He's also had an issue with health. Deontay Johnson, and he, it's not like he's had things that knock him out for a whole season, but it's always something. It's always something. And you just know, you see him, you're sitting there watching Red Zone and you got him in your lineup, and first drive, you see him limping off the field. Now he's trying to play through that the whole game. He's not the same player, that kind of stuff. So I think there's definitely some risk from that perspective. But as far as being a guy that can go out there and, attack the different levels of the field, get open against the different coverage types, I really love Deontay Johnson. But I am curious of, your thoughts on some of the rest of these guys. And I would say I have Bryce Young similar to you, but I think the ceiling is much higher than 3,600 yards.
Yeah.
I'm with you with where he's at. But when we talk about rankings, I think about, okay, does the guy have a ceiling? I think Bryce Young's everybody's talking about Levis. I think Bryce Young's ceiling is way higher than Will Levis.
I would agree.
I would rather draft Bryce Young right now in a fantasy draft than Will Levis every day.
If this offensive line plays well, I haven't projected it close to 65% completion percentage. So I'm with you on that end. I just don't know about the wide receiver core as a whole. And, I look at Johnson and say, I've got him at 150 targets, knocking on the door of 90 receptions, 1,000 yards.
150 targets shouldn't be going in round 7, 8, and 9.
No, exactly.
Ever.
Exactly. So that gives you a perfect understanding of that. And then, the run game, Chuba Hubbard really improved from week 1 on. He's gradually improved each year from Mike Gundy's offense in Oklahoma State to what he's done in Carolina. He's become a more mature player. So there's a real upside to his game right off the bat, and then as Brooks comes in, the same thing. I have them essentially splitting the better half of 1,300 yards between them, and Hubbard being the guy knocking on the door 700 yards right now, and then with Brooks maybe later in the year he gets most of his 640 yards probably later on in the year. So I'm a fan of what I see out of those two guys in terms of ability. It's just a matter of whether that offensive line provides them the support that they need. And I think that the line has the potential to do that. This is one of those teams that you look at and say, just these are guys you're going to be buying late and shopping off the waiver wire early and getting production out of them. This is the team that probably will be the most picked at from the waiver wire.
What are your thoughts on Leggett? Like, I'll say real quickly on Jonathan Brooks, I think that by the time you get in your fantasy championship, there's a chance that like you're winning your league.
Yeah.
If you have him, because Panthers probably still aren't going to be good this year. Now their division's not strong. That leaves anything's possible.
They could be a 7 or 8 team win team.
They could be.
If it works out.
They could be, but overall, they still got they've got steps that they've got to take.
Yeah.
But my point being, there's just a lot of outs for Jonathan Brooks. Like, as much as I like what Chuba Hubbard's done the last 2 years, I think Jonathan Brooks is clearly the better player.
Oh.
And then I think the Panthers are going to want to see what they have in Jonathan Brooks at some point this season.
If you want a headline, I'll say this. I think Jonathan Brooks was a better prospect than Jahmyr Gibbs all around. Like, as an all-around
That's
player.
all you need to know. By the time you're in your fantasy championship, you want Jahmyr Gibbs, whether it's the cheap version and a lesser offense, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Jonathan Brooks. But I really want to hear your thoughts on Leggett.
I think they're going to shoehorn him into this offense, and I don't think it's going to work great. I think he's like a faster Alshon Jeffrey, but needs some work with his routes. If he can show potential as a guy who can run timing routes, his ceiling goes way up. But I don't think he's a timing route runner. I think he's going to be used more in the screen and RPO game and as kind of a Kenny Galladay-esque type of player, but without the surrounding talent to make him be Kenny Galladay. Meaning, I don't think there's going to be a lot of safeties that are going to... I don't think he's going to get as many matchups where he's going to beat safeties and linebackers the way Kenny Galladay did in Detroit. It's possible, and he might get that year 2, year 3, but I would say Kenny Galladay's probably like the model of player you're looking at right now until he shows that he can improve his game. So for me, this year, I have him at like 60 targets, 36 receptions, maybe 10 yards per catch, close to 11, and a score.
Yeah, you're higher than me. I've got him at we're right there together. I got him at 79 targets, so I'm a little bit higher than you. But yeah, I couldn't give him a big target share based off of what I had seen. And the supermodel wasn't crazy about him, but they liked him enough to take him into round 1. I do get concerned. To your point, I continue to hear, we're going to motion him around. We're going to use him in the screen game. I'm like, you just took a dude at the end of round 1. He's huge. Like, he needs to be able to do more than that.
Listen, if I were them, I'd say leave Xavier Leggett alone. And if you want to do that shit, just use Amir Marset Smith, who's already on your roster, who is 10 times the player after the catch that Xavier Leggett is, who you already have at a cheap discount. Just go ahead and use him, and you're going to get about the same production that you're going to get this year at a lot lower of a cost, and then you can move forward and get a real player that's going to help you right away. And Leggett could become a real player. I just don't think he is right now. But I'll tell you this, you've been gracious with your time. It's Saturday. It's time for us to enjoy a little bit, take a little time, or you got other work to do. I don't know which one. Maybe you're painting in the background. I don't know who that. I don't want to insult the painter back there because it looks really good, but from the blurred perspective,
that one's Landry. Landry painted that one.
Yeah, from the reserved perspective, it conjures images of like a movie star I remember in the past, like Shelley Duvall from like The Shining, wearing like a green fire hat. Because I can't see it. I can't see it well enough from back here. It's a little more blurred out.
Yeah, there's a whole wall of them. From the kids, they're all getting older now, but these are like whenever they were in like middle school and elementary.
It's well done, that's for sure, so I thought it was cool. But we'll thank Dwain, of course, you can find at Fantasy Life, and you can find all the great work that he does with projections and modeling and his rankings, and everything's available there for free for the most part. The things that aren't, then you obviously want to pay, because we know how good Dwain's work is. And then, Matt Waldman RSP, you can get Matt Waldman, go to mattwaldman.com, get the pre-draft, post-draft, and the dynasty rankings and projections.
try to do you guys a solid and talk about the teams that nobody likes to talk about with a guy that everybody wants to talk to, so that you can be, really prepared for a lot of those drafts, even those like high-end dog shows that you guys participate in on Sleeper and places like that. No insults to them, but all good. Thanks again, folks, and have a good week.